Memoirs of a Dad, narrated by Malc, Cowle, Chapter 5. By the spring of 1986, the black cloud of uncertainty, following the collapse of Medlock cycles, had begun to clear, and I was no longer facing bankruptcy. I had lost the house in Levenshulme in the February. My outstanding debt to the building society was about £6,500. I owed £5,000 to the Royal Bank of Scotland, but I did not owe any substantial amounts of money to any of my suppliers. The house was valued at £13,500, and once having repossessed it, the building society had put it back on the market. With a bit of luck, when it was sold, there would still be some left over for Tom and myself. Thanks to Manchester City Council, we had been found a 2-bedroom cottage flat in the garden suburb of Burnage. Close by was a junior school, namely Green End, which had a good reputation, and Tom would shortly commence attending it. I almost said, and his education would soon begin. However, his real education had begun long before that, at the University of Life, and it wasn't wasted on him. Tom was always eager to embrace the new and unexpected, and he was forever asking questions. His first spoken word was probably why, but I won't swear to it. It might have been a complete sentence, such as, "That doesn't make sense, Dad, I think." Anyway, as far as our immediate situation went, things were definitely looking up. The money I received for the tandem tided us over for a while, and one of its owners, namely Felix Schmidt, was to provide me with further assistance, but more of that later. Let's return briefly to the last few days of 1985. Claire always took Tom away at Christmas to stay with her family. They would either go to Salisbury, where her parents lived, or to London, where her younger sisters lived. The eldest of these, Tom's Auntie Jane, had a daughter, Sarah, slightly older than Tom, and with whom he was good friends. When he returned to Levenshulme on New Year's Eve, he promptly and rather proudly told me he was now a vegetarian. I smiled and asked him why he had taken such a profound decision. Much to my surprise, he then put the vegetarian case in a clear, simple, and yet highly articulate way. Young Sarah had obviously worked her magic well. I decided to respect his wishes. The next Friday, we went to the local chip shop together. Tom asked for black pudding and chips. Yes, a fish and chip shop that sold black puddings. I naturally explained black puddings were not vegetarian. "But there's no meat in them," Tom responded. "That's true," I said, "but they're made from boiled pig's blood and lumps of fat." "Oh," he replied, a frown on his brow. "Vegetarians can eat fish," I pointed out. "How about a nice fillet of haddock in breadcrumbs? You know you like that." He looked at me, but shook his head. "No, Dad, I'll have black pudding." Thus his flirtation with vegetarianism ended. Why on earth he liked black pudding so much when he was so young, I do not know. I didn't get a taste for them until I was about 18. That Easter, Tom wanted to cycle to and camp at Edale. He wanted to see the friends he'd already made there, Anna, Matthew and Erica. When I told him I'd already made arrangements to meet Mike Murray and Janice and other friends at the Staffordshire end of the Peak District, he was not happy and told me so. The storm didn't last long, however, especially when I informed him we would go there on the bank holiday weekend at the end of May. A bluegrass music festival was being held there on that particular weekend, and it was based in one of the barns on Netherallabrook Farm. The Thursday immediately before Good Friday, and we were on the road again, riding a bicycle made for two. Our panniers packed with sleeping bags, spare clothes and other necessities. The tent was strapped under the rear top tube of the bike, and our insulation mats rolled up and strapped across the rear pannier carrier. Various items of cooking equipment hung down on the left-hand side of the panniers, and an aluminium kettle swung on the right-hand side, lest any errant motorist should get too near. Our destination, Alstonefield, is a tiny and beautiful village whose cottages, farms and church are built of the local limestone. It is situated on the limestone plateau between the Manifold Valley on the one hand and Dovedale on the other. Part of a magical landscape of small woods, rich green pastures, wild moorland, deep limestone gorges, rushing streams and rivers. It's a land of mist and legend. In planning our route there, I was faced with a number of alternatives, and as usual the choices are between the most direct, usually on busy roads competing with cars and lorries, or longer routes on quiet lanes and often more difficult but much more attractive terrain. Manchester is a wonderful city with some quite amazing people, but it is also blessed by being surrounded by an amazing and contrasting variety of rural landscapes, and being rather compact, it is easily escaped from. I decided we should head out to Buxton, forsaking the A6 at Whaley Bridge to climb up Long Hill, overlooking the Goyt Valley. From the Spa town, we took the Ashbourne Road. Once past the quarrying hamlet of Harper Hill, we took the B Road on the right, signposted for Longnaw, and soon after branched left up a lane which would take us high up onto the limestone ridge, through Alstonefield and Sheen, and thence, after crossing the Artington Road, on a lane above the Manifold Valley to our ultimate destination. Listeners will not be surprised when I say this was a pub, namely the George and Dragon. A pub, moreover, which had its own campsite. The grounds of the George comprised a walled enclosure, roughly triangular in shape, the base of which comprised the pub. The enclosure was once used by cattle and sheep drovers in the days before industrialisation and steam railways were even dreamt of. Part of this was used for a small car park, but the rest was still a pasture used for the accommodation of camping folk. We soon had the tent up and our friends began to arrive. By that time I was pretty tired. We'd only cycled about 36 miles, but they were hard miles, mainly uphill, some of them quite steep. And after all, we had done it on a fully laden tandem. I was more than glad of the rest. Tom, of course, felt exhilarated, and he was still full of energy. By this time he was already learning a few tricks of the tandem stoker's craft. He'd already learnt how to breathe heavily and grunt when we were climbing up a steep hill, as if he was doing all the work, and without his contribution we'd both have to walk. It didn't take me long to recover and suggest we do something positive, and so it was that we started out on an energetic and vigorous walk, which terminated very quickly in the pub, where I asked for the menu, a pint of best bitter and a Coke for Tom. Despite my protestations that it was a product of American imperialism, he always insisted on Coke and still drinks the foul and unhealthy concoction to this day. The George proved to be a perfect spot for camping with a child. Once Tom was snug in his sleeping bag, I could safely abandon him, whilst I indulged my own peculiar taste for good beer and good company. The pub's toilets were situated outside next to the camping field, and there were half a dozen of us who quietly checked up on him at frequent intervals. The fact is, Tom not only loved camping, but also preferred sleeping in a tent to his own bed at home. In all the years of his childhood, he never woke up in the middle of the night when camping, although, unlike his dad, he did tend to arise around about the same time as the sun. And this, of course, for an adult like me, could be rather disconcerting, particularly if he awoke feeling hungry. However, as I have already mentioned, he had already learnt the skill of looking extremely pathetic and neglected, so he used to leave the tent without bothering to wake his neglectful father, and wandered around the campsite until he got 2 or 3 bits of other people's breakfasts inside him. One thing was for sure, Whatever his father's situation, young Thomas had no intention of going hungry. He had decided at a very early stage of his life, as most children probably do, that freedom from hunger is one of the most basic of human rights, a right only really appreciated by those who have at times gone without. Unfortunately, for millions of the most vulnerable children of the human species, so clever as it is, they are still denied this most basic of all basic rights, and global capitalism remains incapable of sharing out nature's bounty fairly. But then, as my Auntie Dolly once told me, there is nothing fair in this world apart from the weather, and that's not fair very often. People still need to struggle for their rights, and those that are in a better position than others have a duty to struggle on behalf of those who are less capable. Nonetheless, it is my firm belief that human beings are innately good, and being social animals, they tend to automatically help each other out when necessity demands. Tom went to bed that night sleepy, happy, and content. I was surrounded by friends, amongst them not only Mick Murray and Janice, but also Vic Eddisford, the district secretary who had first recruited me to work full-time for the Communist Party of Great Britain, and who had thus landed that party with its most disorganised organiser. He and his partner, Anne Fleetwood, were the very first to descend upon me when Medlock Cycles went bust, and had given me much-needed support in a time of crisis. So Tom went to his slumbers, and I looked forward to what the new day would bring